Hello my dear students and my dear friends. Assalamu alaikum. I hope all of you are fine. And friends, as you know, we are discussing about the structure of a eukaryotic cell, right? So in the previous lecture I have introduced that what is cell, what are the properties of a cell, and what are the main parts and what are the main structures which are present inside the cell, right? Now I have decided, and as I told you, is that I had told you that we will record each part of a cell in a separate lecture, right? So in this video, as you can see, I have drawn here a very small section of the cell membrane. So we are discussing about the structure of the cell membrane. So keep watching the video till the end so that you will learn the structure of the cell membrane, that what are the parts, what are the main substances which are present inside the cell membrane. So let's go for it. First of all, let me define cell membrane, that what is a cell membrane, right? This cell membrane is also known as plasma membrane, right friends? Cell membrane is also known as the plasma membrane. Why it is called the plasma membrane? Because it is surrounding the plasma of the cell, right? It is surrounding the plasma of the cell, the cytoplasm of the cell. That's why we call it the plasma membrane. And then it is also known as the periplasmic membrane. Peri means on all sides, plasmic means plasma, so periplasmic membrane it is also known as. Okay friends, so cell membrane, periplasmic membrane or plasma membrane, they all are the same terms. Look carefully. For example, if here we have a tissue, right? This is a tissue, and in this tissue we have a cell lying there. Let me make this cell a little bit larger, right? This is a cell in this tissue, right? So we have many cells here. We have many cells in a tissue. We have lots of cells, but this one cell I have enlarged it, right? As you know, in the tissue we have certain substances, certain fluids in the cell, in the tissue. In the tissue we have certain fluids, and you know that inside the cell we also have fluids, right? So the fluids which are present inside the cell are called cytoplasm, right? Or we call it intracellular fluids. What? Intracellular fluids. Done. And the fluids which are present outside to the cell, these are called the extracellular fluids, right? Extracellular fluid. So what is actually cell membrane? What is the definition of cell membrane? Right? So you can see that the extracellular fluids and the intracellular fluids are separated by this periplasmic membrane. Right? So what is cell membrane? Cell membrane is a boundary between extracellular fluids and intracellular fluids. That is the very simple definition of a cell membrane. What is cell membrane? Let me define it. A boundary between ECM, extracellular matrix, right, and intracellular matrix or intracellular fluid. If you are not writing this, you can also say that it is a boundary between extracellular fluids and intracellular fluids, right? So cell membrane is a boundary, is a membrane which separates the extracellular fluid from intracellular fluid. A membrane, or if you want to write it perfectly, a semi-permeable membrane, a semi-permeable membrane which separates extracellular fluid from intracellular fluids. This is called your cell membrane, friends. This is the definition of cell membrane. By definition, we should know that cell membrane is a boundary between extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid. Composition and structure is another thing that we will discuss right now, right? So this was the definition of the cell membrane. Friends, this is the definition. What is the composition of your cell membrane? Your cell membrane is composed of what? Mainly, cell membrane is a phospholipid bilayer, right? As you can see here, it is a phospholipid bilayer. I will explain this diagram after a while, right? So cell membrane is mainly composed of three important things. The first one is a you can say lipids. The first thing is lipids. The second thing are proteins. What? Proteins. And the third important factor which is present inside your cell membrane are carbohydrates. Very small amount, but we should not ignore them, are called the carbohydrates, right? So there are about 55% of proteins, 40% of lipids, and only 5% of carbohydrates you have in your cell membrane, right? So this was a little bit about composition. Now let's move further forward, and cell membrane is not so easy. We will see the structure of cell membrane right now, right? So this was the definitions, composition, and what is the structure of cell membrane? Structure of cell membrane. So friends, in order to explain the structure of cell membrane, there are three important models which came to be known in order to explain the structure of the cell membrane. So the first model that we have is, or let us see before the model, let me say something, that the cell membrane is actually made up of three different layers. Look carefully. Cell membrane is actually made up of three different layers. First two layers, this red layer and this outer red layer. Look carefully. This is outer red layer and this is inner red layer, right? And in between these two outer and inner red layers, there are the middle layer, right? So the book says that the inner layer is electron deficient, right? The inner layer is the electron lucent, right? And the outer two layers are electron dense layers. It means that there are more electrons here, and in the middle layer there are very less electrons. So how many layers in order to say about the structure of cell membrane, the cell membrane is composed of, book says that it is composed of three layers. The inner and the outer. Inner and outer, so there are two layers, electron dense layers, they contain more electron. But the inner layer, electron lucent layer, which contains less electron, right? So cell membrane is composed of three layers. How many layers? Three layers. First, number one, inner, which is electron lucent, and the two outer and inner, right? or instead of inner, if I'll write middle, that will be more precise, right? So middle layer is electron lucent, then outer plus inner, this is now correct, outer plus inner, that is electron dense layers. It means that they contain more electrons, right? So this is point number 1, this is point number 2. So there are 3 layers, which is the middle layer, electron lucent layer, the outer and inner, which are electron dense layer. Okay, we will go further forward. Next, in order to explain the structure of the cell membrane, there were 3 different models came to known in different ages, right? So models to explain the structure of cell membrane, right? What were the models to explain the structure of cell membrane? So the first model that came to be known as the Dennelly-Davidson model, right? The first one is the Dennelly-Davidson model, right? What did they say? They were 2 scientists, and they said this model was presented in 1935. This was presented in 1935, and this model says that the cell membrane is sandwiched between the 2 protein layers, right? Look carefully. This says that this is the actual cell membrane. Who says? Davidson and Dennelly says that this is the actual cell membrane. It is a phospholipid bilayer, right? They say that cell membrane is made up of phospholipid bilayer on the surface of which proteins are floating there. It contains inner proteins and outer proteins, like this. So these black layers are called the proteins, and look carefully. So from here up to here, this is your sandwich layer. Sandwich. So the cell membrane, right, is composed of proteins and lipids and phospholipids, in which the phospholipids are sandwiched between the outer and inner protein layers. So this is called the Davidson-Dennelly model. What is that? They say that cell membrane is sandwiched of lipids covered by proteins. They say cell membrane is a sandwich of lipids. Okay, we know that cell membrane is a sandwich of lipids covered by proteins. Covered by proteins. This was the first model, and we are not going to explain this model more, right? We will explain the model which is now acceptable, that is fluid mosaic model. We'll go in detail of that, right? So the first model says, the Davidson-Dennelly model says that the cell membrane is a sandwich of lipids covered by proteins, the inner protein layer and the outer protein layer. This is the Davidson-Dennelly model, which was the first model in order to explain the structure of the cell membrane, right? Then there is the second model to explain the structure of the cell membrane, that is the D.J. Robertson, right? J.D. Robertson model. J.D. Robertson. J.D. Robertson considers cell membrane as a unit membrane. He considers cell membrane as a unit membrane. Unit membrane means that he says that cell membrane is very, very, very thin membrane, and it is considered as only one membrane, right? As you can see here, we say that cell membrane is a phospholipid bilayer, 2 layers, right? But according to J.D. Robertson, cell membrane is a unit membrane. It is composed of only 1 layer. He says that it's composed of only 1 layer, right? Okay, then what he says? He says that this one layer consists of three layers, right? In this one layer, the unit membrane says that this one layer itself is consisting of three layers. And what are those three layers? Look, this is the first layer, this is the second, and this is the third layer, right? So he says that cell membrane is a unit membrane. The concept of the unit membrane was proposed by J.D. Robertson, right? And he says that cell membrane is a membrane which is composed of phospholipids, right? Cell membrane is a membrane which is composed of phospholipids, and these phospholipids are covered by proteins. These phospholipids are covered by proteins. So he says that this is only one layer, a unit membrane, right? A unit membrane consisting of how many layers? Three layers. The outer protein layer, the inner protein layer, and the middle phospholipid layer, right? So this is the phospholipid layer, phospholipid layer, and this is the protein layer, and it's also protein layer, right? So how many layers? 1, 2, and 3. That's why this model is also known as trilaminar model. Which model? Trilaminar model, right? He says that, once again I will repeat that, he says that cell membrane is a unit membrane, one membrane, right, but consisting of three layers: an outer protein layer, a middle phospholipid layer, and an inner protein layer. That's why this is called trilaminar model. Okay, so trilaminar, I will write here trilaminar model. Okay, then the third and very important model, J.D. Robertson model, was presented in 1957. Yeah, 1957. Then the third and important model came, and it was presented in 1972 by S.J. Singer and G.L. Nicholson, and this model is acceptable up to now. So what is that model? Look carefully. Which model? The fluid mosaic model, the third one. Fluid mosaic model. It is very acceptable model up to now. No changes have been done in this model. So this was presented in 1972, and the two scientists naming as S.J. Singer and G.L. Nicholson. These were the two persons who explained the fluid mosaic model, right? What does this model says? This model says that cell membrane is a phospholipid bilayer. The first important point about it, it is a phospholipid bilayer. Okay, we know that cell membrane is a phospholipid bilayer. Number two, it contains proteins. Right? And these proteins, some proteins are embedded, and some proteins float on surface, right? So this model, the fluid mosaic model, says that the cell membrane is made up of phospholipid bilayer in which some proteins are embedded, right? Look here, some proteins are embedded and some proteins float on the surface of this lipid bilayer. This is called fluid mosaic model. Once again I will repeat, and once again I will draw the diagram here, right? They say that cell membrane is made up of a phospholipid bilayer, and I will explain this phospholipid, don't worry. We will have a full lecture on it right now, right? So it is made up of a phospholipid bilayer. Okay, look carefully what I'm doing. Let's cut it here. So how many layers it became? It became two layers, first layer and second layer. In this layer there are phospholipids. This red head is the phosphate head, and these are the lipid tails or fatty acids. Lipid tails, right? So phospholipid, we call it phospholipid. So cell membrane is made up of phospholipids, right? Okay, in which some proteins are embedded. Embedded means some proteins go inside and comes out like this. Some proteins are embedded and some proteins are floating on the surface of the phospholipid layer from inside and from outside, right? So if we make it a cell like this, this is a cell. So this is the structure of that cell membrane. Some proteins are floating on the surface from outer side, and some proteins are floating on the surface from inside, and some proteins are embedded inside this phospholipid bilayer, right? So this is the fluid mosaic model, and we now will explain the fluid mosaic model in detail, and we will have a very full explanation of this phospholipid layer. What is the composition of this phospholipid layer? What are the other structures which are found in this phospholipid layer inside? So friends, see you in the next lecture, and we will discuss the structure of the real cell membrane. So be with us and don't go anywhere. Till then, Allah Hafiz.